My name's Evan. I'm 29, and I never thought I'd be the type to write one of these posts. But what happened over the past few months has been gnawing at me, and I guess I just need to tell someone who doesn't know me. The moment that set everything in motion started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished a call with a client and tossed my phone onto the counter when it started ringing again. Dad. He doesn't usually call in the middle of the day, so I answered. But before I could even say hello, I realized he must not have heard the click when I picked up. There was laughter on the other end, and then his voice, casual but cutting in a way only family can be. He'll never amount to anything. Just a loser living off our name. I froze. It felt like someone had reached through the phone and squeezed my lungs. Then another voice, my mom's, soft and amused, chimed in. At least he's useful enough to watch the house while we're gone. More laughter. Then the sound of ice clinking in a glass and my dad's voice again. Yeah, he should be grateful. We could have just rented the place out. He's lucky we even trust him. I didn't hang up right away. I just stood there, listening, my stomach turning into a cold, solid knot. I don't know how long I stayed like that before I quietly pressed the red button on the screen and set the phone down like it had burned me. For a while, I just paced around the living room of the very house they were talking about, my house. Well, technically, I'd bought it 2 years ago with my own money, a place I was proud of because I worked hard to afford it. My parents had been so excited when I told them I was closing on it. At the time, I thought it was genuine pride. I'd invited them to stay with me whenever they wanted, and they took me up on that. They'd been using my house as a kind of base whenever they flew back from their long trips abroad. At first, I liked it. I liked being the good son, the one they could rely on. I told myself that letting them stay here was just my way of giving back for everything they did for me growing up. But as the months passed, I realized their stays were getting longer and more frequent. My pantry would be half empty when they left. My utilities were higher than ever, and every time I mentioned splitting costs, Dad would chuckle and say, "We raised you. You can handle a few bills." I always swallowed my irritation. I didn't want to seem ungrateful, but hearing him say those words, just a loser living off our name, flipped a switch I didn't know existed. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the floor until the sun came up. I replayed every conversation, every little jab they'd made in passing. The time Dad laughed when I told him I was stressed about my mortgage and said, "If you can't handle this, maybe you shouldn't own a house." The time Mom told me I should be more like my brother, who always makes the smart moves, even though he still lives rent-free in their old house. The next day, when I got a text from Mom saying they'd extended their Europe trip another week, and hope you're keeping the place nice for us, something inside me went cold and calm at the same time. For the next few days, I went about my routine like normal, but my mind was spinning quietly behind the scenes. I started pulling documents, looking through files, checking what I owned outright and what was still under financing. I called my realtor just to ask about the market, and when she told me houses in my neighborhood were selling in under 2 weeks for insane prices, I felt my chest tighten with a strange mix of fear and excitement. I didn't tell anyone what I was thinking. Not my brother, not my friends. I kept smiling through our family group chat, sending pictures of the dog, answering questions about the house like nothing was wrong. But every night I stayed up late, cleaning out closets, going through boxes, donating what I didn't need. Each day the house got a little emptier, and each day I felt a little lighter, and a little more like I was doing something dangerous. Then one night, I found myself standing in the middle of my living room, looking around at the space that had been my home, my refuge, and my burden. And I made my decision. I called my realtor back the next morning and said the words I didn't think I'd say so soon. Let's list it. By the end of the week, the for sale sign was in my yard. I kept it all secret. Every time my parents called from Europe, I made sure the background behind me looked the same. I made up stories about how quiet things were here, how nice it was to have the place to myself. All the while, I was signing papers, fielding offers, and packing up my life into a storage unit. When I accepted an offer, nearly $980,000, more than I'd even hoped for, I didn't feel relief. Not yet. I felt this slow building current of something like power humming just under my skin. I moved out a few days before the closing date. The house was nearly bare when I left, just a few light fixtures and curtains left behind for the new owners. On the kitchen counter, I left one thing, a folded piece of paper with 6 words scrawled across it in black marker. The last night before I handed over the keys, I sat in my car outside the empty house and just stared at it. I imagined my parents coming back from Europe, dragging their suitcases up the driveway, laughing like they always do, expecting everything to be the way they left it. And then I imagined their faces when the key didn't turn. I don't know why that thought made me smile, but it did. I didn't know then just how intense their reaction would be, or how far they'd go once they realized what I'd done. When the day finally came, I was hundreds of miles away, sitting in a quiet coffee shop with my laptop open and my phone face down. The house had officially closed the day before. The keys were no longer mine. The only thing that was still mine was the note I left behind, waiting like a fuse ready to be lit. I didn't have to wait long. At 3:17 p.m., my phone started buzzing. First Mom, then Dad, then Mom again. A string of calls one after the other, relentless, until I switched the phone to silent. Then came the texts, first polite, then confused, then angry. Evan, what is going on? The key isn't working. The house is empty. Empty. Where are you? You better have an explanation. Call us now. I didn't answer. I just sat there, sipping my coffee, watching the messages roll in like waves during a storm. There was something almost surreal about it, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. Then came the photo. It was a picture of my kitchen counter. And there it was, the note I'd left behind, the one with 6 words written in sharp black marker. The family loser did this. No one texted for about 20 minutes after that. I imagined them just standing there in the empty house, trying to process what they were looking at. When Dad finally called again, I let it go to voicemail. I didn't listen to it until much later that night, when I was alone in my new apartment. His voice was low, tight, and angrier than I'd ever heard it. You had no right to do this. We trusted you. You just humiliated this family. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Call me back immediately. I didn't call back. Instead, I went for a long walk through the quiet streets of my new neighborhood. I kept thinking about that word, humiliated. For years, I'd twisted myself into knots trying to avoid doing exactly that to them. I'd bitten my tongue when they belittled me, smiled when they took advantage of my space, nodded and agreed when they told me how I should be living my life. But the truth was, humiliation had been my shadow for years. I just hadn't realized it until I finally stepped out from under it. When I got back to my apartment, there were already voicemails from my brother too. His were different, calmer, but sharper in a way that cut even deeper. What are you doing, Evan? Mom's been crying all night. Dad's furious. You can't just sell the house out from under them. They needed a place to stay. You're being selfish. Selfish. That word used to sting. Now, it just made me tired. The next day, Mom finally got through to me. I let the phone ring twice before answering, bracing myself. Evan, she said, her voice quivering, how could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you. Something inside me snapped, quietly, not loudly like an explosion, but like a rope that had finally frayed all the way through. You mean after everything I've done for you? I said, my voice steady. I let you live there for free. I took care of everything while you were gone. And you called me a loser for it. There was silence on the other end. Then she said, almost whispering, you weren't supposed to hear that. I did, I said, and I'm done pretending I didn't. She started crying again, saying things like, we didn't mean it, and your father was just joking. But every word just sounded like noise now. When I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking, not from anger this time, but from something else. Relief, maybe. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the look I imagined on their faces when they realized the house was gone, the way they must have stood in that empty living room staring at the note. But the more I pictured it, the more I realized this wasn't over. They weren't just going to let this go. And I was right. Over the next week, the calls didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. Dad started leaving long, furious voicemails about family loyalty and respect. Mom sent texts saying they were thinking of taking legal action, though I knew they couldn't. I had done everything by the book. But what got to me wasn't the anger. It was how quickly the narrative flipped. Suddenly, I wasn't the good son anymore. I was the traitor, the one who betrayed them. And that's when I realized something important. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to play by their script anymore. I started ignoring every call, every message. I changed my number. I stopped checking the family group chat entirely. I thought they might back down after a while. I was wrong. One morning, I woke up to find a letter slid under my apartment door. No stamp, No envelope, just a single piece of paper with my dad's handwriting. It said, "You can't run from your family forever." That was the moment I knew this was going to escalate, and that if I didn't take control, they were going to try to pull me back in by force. A week later, it happened. I had just come back from a late evening run, earbuds still in, when I saw a familiar car parked across the street from my apartment building. My stomach dropped. It was Dad's. I almost turned around right there, but before I could react, the driver's door opened and he stepped out. Even from a distance, I could see the tightness in his jaw, the way his hands were balled into fists. "Evan," his voice cut through the quiet street, sharp enough to make a couple walking their dog turn their heads. "We need to talk." I didn't move. My heart was hammering, but at the same time, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I'd been waiting for this, hadn't I? "Talk about what?" I called back, my voice steadier than I expected. "You know what?" he said, walking toward me. "You think you can just disappear, sell the house, cut us off like we're strangers? You think that's how family works?" I glanced up at the windows of my building. A few lights were on. My neighbors might have been watching. For once, I didn't care. "I didn't cut you off," I said, taking a step toward him. "You did that the second you called me a loser and laughed about it behind my back." He stopped walking, just a few feet away from me now. His face was flushed, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just anger, but panic. "You're overreacting," he said finally, his voice lower now, but no less intense. "You sold the house we all loved. Do you understand how humiliating this has been for us? People are asking questions. What are we supposed to tell them?" I let out a bitter laugh before I could stop myself. "You mean your friends? The ones you bragged to about the house I paid for?" His jaw clenched. "Watch your tone." There it was, that old phrase he used to throw at me growing up, anytime I dared to push back. But this time, instead of making me shrink, it just made me stand taller. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "You don't get to talk to me like that anymore. You don't get to use my house, my money, my life as props to make yourself look good, and then call me worthless when I'm not around." For a moment, he just stared at me. I think he expected me to back down, to apologize like I always used to. But I didn't move. When he finally spoke, his voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "This isn't over. You owe us an explanation. You owe this family something for what you've done." I shook my head slowly. "No, I don't owe you anything." His face went red, and for a second, I thought he might actually shout, but then he just turned on his heel and walked back to the car. He didn't slam the door, didn't peel away. He just sat there for a minute, engine running, before finally driving off. I stood there on the sidewalk long after the taillights disappeared, my chest tight. Part of me felt like I'd just won something. Another part of me felt like I'd just declared war. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my brother. "Dad's furious. Mom hasn't stopped crying. They said they're coming back tomorrow with the rest of the family. You need to be there when they arrive." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back just 2 words, "Not happening." But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to end with a few texts and an argument in the street. If they were planning to come here, to force some kind of family meeting, then I needed to be ready. I spent the rest of the day thinking about every possible way this could go. I could ignore them, sure, but I knew them well enough to know that would just make them push harder. By nightfall, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to hide. The next day, I made sure to get home early. I sat in my apartment with the door locked, blinds drawn, waiting for the inevitable knock. When it finally came, 3 sharp raps, like a gavel, my stomach clenched, but I didn't move from the chair by the window. "Evan," Mom's voice called through the door, muffled but pleading. "Please open up. We just want to talk." I stayed silent. A moment later, Dad's voice came, harder, louder. "You can't ignore us forever. You're going to face this family whether you like it or not." I stood, walked slowly to the door, and put my hand on the knob. My heart was racing, but I wasn't scared this time. I was ready. I opened the door, and there they were, Mom, Dad, my brother, and even my aunt and uncle standing behind them like backup. The whole family, gathered in my hallway like some kind of tribunal. No one said anything at first. We just stood there, staring at each other. Then Dad stepped forward. "You're going to explain yourself," he said, his voice low but dangerous. "Right now." I took a step back and gestured for them to come in. If this was going to happen, it was going to happen on my terms. They filed into my apartment one by one, the air heavy with tension. My mom clutched her purse like a shield, My brother kept his arms crossed like he was already siding with Dad, and my aunt and uncle stood stiffly near the wall, clearly there as witnesses more than anything else. Sit, I said quietly, motioning to the couch and chairs. To my own surprise, they actually did. I stayed standing. Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at me like I was a defendant in a courtroom. We want to know why, he said finally. Why you sold the house. Why you blindsided us. Why you've turned your back on this family. I let out a slow breath. You really want to know why? Yes, Mom said softly, her eyes wet. We deserve an explanation. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how absurd it sounded. You deserve an explanation? After everything you've said about me? After calling me a loser when you thought I couldn't hear? Mom flinched. Dad's jaw tightened. That was a private conversation, he said, his voice sharp. Exactly, I shot back. And you didn't think I'd ever know how you really feel about me. But I do now. And it changes everything. My brother shifted uncomfortably. Evan, come on. You're making a huge deal out of one comment. Dad jokes like that all the time. One comment, I said, feeling my voice rise for the first time. You think this is about one comment? This is about years of being treated like I'm less than. Years of being told to be grateful, to just smile and let you take what you want, my time, my space, my money, because that's what a good son does. And I did it. I did it for years. But not anymore. My dad stood up now, towering over me, his face red. You ungrateful little. Don't, I said, cutting him off. My voice was calm, but it had an edge that made him pause. Don't go there. I am not ungrateful. I gave you everything I could. I let you live in that house for free. I took care of it when you were gone. I made sure it stayed nice so you'd have somewhere to come back to. And you still laughed at me behind my back. You called me a loser. Well, the loser sold the house. The loser moved on. And the loser is done being treated like dirt. For a moment, the room was completely silent. You could have heard the clock ticking in the kitchen. Mom started crying then, whispering things like, we didn't mean it, and you've misunderstood us. But Dad wasn't backing down. You've embarrassed this family, he said through gritted teeth. People are talking. Do you have any idea how this makes us look? Good, I said flatly. Maybe they'll stop seeing me as your free handyman and start seeing me as my own person. My uncle finally spoke up, clearly trying to diffuse things. Maybe everyone needs to calm down. There's still time to fix this. No, I said, turning to face him. There's nothing to fix. The house is sold. The money's mine. And none of you get a say in what I do with it. That's when my brother snapped. You're being selfish, Evan. We all counted on that house. You knew Mom and Dad needed a place to stay when they came back. How could you just take that away? Because it was never their house. I said, my voice shaking now. It was mine. Mine. And I'm allowed to choose who lives in it. I'm allowed to choose who I open my door to. And I'm allowed to close it when people use me and call me worthless when they think I can't hear. I felt something in my chest loosen as the words came out, like I'd been holding my breath for years and was finally letting it go. Dad just stared at me, his face unreadable now. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he said, if you walk away from this family, don't expect us to be there for you when you come crawling back. I smiled then, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. That's the difference between us, I said quietly. I don't need you to be there. I'm not crawling anywhere. I walked to the door and held it open. We're done here. No one moved at first. Then Mom stood, tears streaming down her face, and walked past me without saying a word. My aunt and uncle followed, looking uncomfortable. My brother glared at me, but didn't speak. Dad was the last one to leave. He paused in the doorway, staring at me like he was memorizing my face. You'll regret this, he said finally. Maybe, I replied, but at least the decision will be mine. And then he was gone. I stood there for a long time after the door shut, listening to their footsteps fade down the hall. My apartment felt impossibly quiet, but not in a lonely way, in a peaceful way. Over the next few weeks, the calls stopped. The texts stopped. Even the passive-aggressive posts on social media about disrespectful children stopped. It was like they'd all agreed to go silent at once. At first, I thought the silence would hurt, but instead, it felt like healing. I settled into my new place, started a new routine, and slowly realized how much lighter life felt without that constant weight of expectation pressing on me. And then, one afternoon, I got an email from my realtor, a simple one-line message that said, your funds have cleared. I stared at the number in my account, the result of selling that house, and for the first time, I felt completely free. I didn't buy another house right away. I traveled. I took a trip to Italy, something I'd always wanted to do but never felt I could justify. I started saying yes to things I used to put off because I was worried about being responsible for everyone else. Months later, I heard through a cousin that my parents had rented a small condo whenever they came back to town now, and that Dad was still bitter about the stunt I pulled. But I didn't feel guilt anymore, because it wasn't a stunt. It was me finally choosing myself. And that note I left on the counter? That was the truest thing I'd ever written. The family loser did this. And for the first time, being the loser felt like winning.